You're good.
Can you see it? Yeah. So I'm gonna push it a little bit further. I'm gonna try to actually put it, well, let's see. We're gonna leave it like this. This is working. So as long as I'll do it manually. So anyways, thank you again for the introduction. And I do want to thank the organizers, Clarence and Carrie, for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be able to address the Pragma Council and to kick off this conversation about the need for urban transformations. Before I start, and since I'm virtually, I do want to acknowledge that I'm talking to you, or I'm speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Akimel Odam and the Peeposh Indigenous nations, who are the traditional stewards of the Phoenix Valley. Yes, I wanted to make sure that I got time to say that. So what I wanted to do today, I wanted to talk about the role of the imagination in fostering urban transformations. And for this, I'm going to be talking a lot about some of the work that I have been doing here at Arizona State University. I'm going to be focusing on the project, the Urban Resilience to Extreme Events Sustainability Research Network. And so I'll be talking about how we have approached this idea of building urban resilience through the use of imagination. But then I also want to, towards the end, talk about some of the things that I feel have been shortcomings or pieces that I think are still missing from this work. That I think that as planners and as students of planning are important to consider. And you know, I'm going to end up with maybe some provocations, slide invitations for the discussion. So perhaps a good place to somewhat start is to ask ourselves, why do we need urban transformations, right? And I think that the basic answer is that as the world continues to urbanize, and it is continuing to urbanize, our ability to maintain our current prosperity and to bring others to share into this prosperity is really tied to how we are managing urban growth and how we are managing cities. And so I think that increasingly what this means is that we need to manage or to satisfy housing needs, we need to satisfy transportation, energy demands, etc. But also we need to be managing for resilience. And we can say, you know, like the past few years have made it crystal clear that cities are in this. And so I think that talking or just like having a quick survey of things that have happened really just last year, we were talking about cold spells in Texas. We're talking about heat waves in Toronto, and actually record-breaking temperatures in many Canadian municipalities over the past summer. We're talking about hurricanes in San Juan or in the Caribbean in general. And so I think that with that kind of brings to the forefront is that cities are being confronted today with these new realities that are imposed by climate change. And so if we look at any of the current or the projected trends, it suggests that Canadian cities need to be accelerating the pace at which climate adaptation and climate transformation mitigation is happening. And also what, like the type of things that I've been interested in are I focus a lot on extreme events because I tend to think that those are the ones that move politicians and that sort of harness maybe more social movements. And you know, we're talking about floods, which has been identified as problematic in many Canadian cities. We're talking about droughts, we're talking about ice storms, heat waves, etc. And at the same time, we do have to recognize that Canadian cities have an aging, and North American cities are faced with this infrastructure that is aging and that was designed with a different climate in mind. I also want to note that when we're talking about the impacts of climate change and who will feel these impacts, these are unevenly distributed. So we know that those people who are economically vulnerable and socially marginalized are going to continue to bear the brunt of climate extremes. So I think that when we think about climate adaptation as a challenge, I think that we can see this compounding challenge of like social impacts, ecological impacts, technological impacts that to me highlight this need for transformative change. And who is in charge of doing this transformative change? I think that the answer is that it might very well be cities. I think maybe the Canadian landscape is a little bit different, but clearly here in the US, we come from a time where there has been clear inaction, if not just like efforts to sabotage any climate infrastructure, climate adaptation infrastructure. And so I think that when you have this federal level vacuum, where you have international agreements that are weak at best, cities have been stepping up to the plate. And this is just a list of some of the cities of the over 500 Canadian municipalities that have declared a climate emergency. So then the question, I guess, is like, if we're in agreement that we need to accelerate urban transformation to deal with climate change, how do we support that? How do we support that urban transformation? And what I'm trying to argue here is that we as a community of practitioners and researchers and planners to be, we could look at Foresight methods. And Foresight methods are a very diverse group of activities, of approaches, in terms of, but that allows us to think about the future in a structured ways. So, and I think the Foresight methods are important because as humans, what we do currently is based on what we think is going to happen in the future. So in some ways, we are responding to what we think our actions are going to deliver into the future. We might be doing this individually, but we might be doing this, you know, at an institutional level. So, you know, individually, we might be changing our own behavior. Institutionally, we might be changing our policies. Hopefully, we are changing our policies through Foresight methods. And so out of all the, you know, many diverse Foresight methods that are out there, I'm going to be talking about scenario planning, which is the one that I have been using in the Urban Resilience to Extremes project. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with some of these methods. And scenarios in particular, I like to define them as this coherent and internally consistent and plausible descriptions of a future, of either a place or a situation. So in essence, you are creating a narrative about what that future could be, right? And we do this in a comparative way. So it's not only one future, but that you can say there could be many possible futures. And so in some ways, what scenario planning does is that it provides multiple and diverse answers to the question, what if? What if we decided to, you know, put a carbon tax? What if we decided to go solar? What if we decided to do, you know, more nature-based solutions? And so it provides a space to answer those questions and to do so comparatively. So what I'm going to be now taking a bit of a deeper dive into what I've mentioned before, which is the project, the Urban Resilience to Extreme Sustainability Research Network. So this is a mouthful, so I'm going to just be talking about the UREX. And so this is the project that I've been involved with for the past 5 years. It was a project that was funded through the National Science Foundation. So I think it was, $12 million grant for 5 years. And basically we were working with 9 cities in United States and Latin America. And the idea here was to start looking at specific climate change impacts. So we were looking at extreme heat, we were looking at floods, and we were looking at drought. Obviously, not all the cities had the same extreme events in the same ways, but most of them would have 2 out of 3. And so we wanted to be able to have the cities also create a network to compare, almost like to compare notes, to compare strategies. So all in all, this involves about 17 institutions across America and maybe about 200 researchers and practitioners that have come together in this network. And the biggest node stays at Arizona State University, where I'm based. And so the question that we were trying to answer with this, sorry, here. It was, how can we enhance the resilience of social and ecological and built infrastructure in cities in the face of increasing climate change challenges? And as I said, our project adopted this futures approach. And indeed, the keystone of the project was this series of of scenario planning workshop that we did in each of the cities, and these are some of the pictures from the different cities. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of depth because I think that for this crowd it might be interesting to know how we, like the mechanics of how we organize and how we prepare and what kind of outputs we produce. So we were basically bringing maybe 40 to 50 decision makers. And in here, what we were trying to attract these conversations where people, we call them like the movers and the shakers, right? Whoever we thought had something to say in terms of, decision making at the municipal level with regards to climate adaptation. So oftentimes we would invite people who worked in the municipality, but also we would have subject experts as well as NGO leaders, depending on the city. And so we brought them together in this conversation to create this future visions. Like we wanted them to create 4 or 5 different future visions across different themes. And the themes, the 4 or 5 visions were decided together with the city, and it really depended on what the city was doing at that time, what they were, what kind of processes they had ongoing. So more or less the scenarios that had to do with extreme weather events were more or less present, but then a city might be really interested in looking at energy transition, so we would create that conversation. Or a city wanted to talk about food and urban agriculture, so we would create a scenario around those themes. And that was done in discussion with the city, and it was a very tailored process. I'm going to show you like the ones that we did for Phoenix. So oops, I realized that maybe you can't see the full screen, sorry. So for Phoenix, we were working in the South Phoenix. So South Phoenix is an underserved area of the city of Phoenix. And so it's basically, we call it like a village or a borough. It's more like these scenarios were done at the neighborhood level. We also let the cities decide what kind of, like the scale of the scenarios, what made more sense for them. And Phoenix decided that they really wanted to focus on the neighborhood. And so in conversation with different community leaders and with the city of Phoenix, we decided that the 5 visions that we were going to create were going to be this ones. And one was around the cool desert city. So goes without saying, Phoenix is very hot. And so, these communities, especially like South Phoenix, doesn't have a lot of canopy cover, etc. And so we were looking at, well, how to cool down these communities. There was the mountain to river, which was really interesting scenario. It was one of my favorites. It really speaks to the location of South Phoenix, between the South Mountain and the Salt River. And so this was a conversation around eco-hydrological connectivity, because it really was related to flooding. But there were a lot of things tied into it. There were things around history. There were things about legacies. There were things about identity that were part of this conversation and this scenario. There was the equity district was a vision that was an ask from the community when we were asking what kind of thematics they wanted to explore. And in this one, what we did is we explored current social and environmental justice challenges. And so we opened that conversation. The Just Green Enough was an interesting one. It's somewhat related, but the Just Green Enough really has to do with wanting to increase the level of green amenities and green infrastructure that part of the city currently enjoys, while avoiding displacement and gentrification, which is a big concern in this part of the city. And finally, the last scenario that we co-developed was, we call it the connected and mobile scenario. And this one wanted to explore the challenge of mobility, because Phoenix, the way that, it's a desert city, so it's really not that walkable, and especially because it's so hot, it's hard to move around without a car, the way that it's designed and just the climate. So we wanted to talk about connectivity, but it didn't just have to be about creating a transit system. It also, had a conversation around social connectivity, ecological connectivity, and so on. So those were the 5 themes that we developed with the city of Phoenix. And with other cities, we would just have a conversation and they would choose. In terms of preparing for the actual workshops, our team, this is a large team. These are some of the things that we did in advance. So we started with what we call the governance analysis. And so this was decided with our city partners. What were the current documents? So between 3, no less than 3 documents, no more than 10 documents that were important for us to understand what the political landscape looked like in that city at that time. So oftentimes, that would start with the general plan of that city. But then some cities might have a climate action plan, so we would consult with them with those. Sometimes they would have a flood management plan. Sometimes they would have a resilience planning or a resilience officer. And so we would consider all of that to have, to understand the lay of the land, to understand the lay of the political landscape, which kind of determines, what is a good conversation, what's not a really good conversation to have at that time. Then we had a team that was doing the trend analysis. The trend analysis was really about doing downscale models for precipitation and temperature. And so the idea was to use this as a way of showing, what business as usual would mean for this particular city if we were to do nothing about it. And so these were used kind of like at the beginning of the workshop as kind of baselines. We also surveyed the key stakeholders. So again, going back to the people who we thought were the movers and the shakers, we kind of cast a broader net. And so we might survey 400 people, and then maybe only 50 were invited to the workshop. But the idea here is, again, to people who are involved in climate adaptation, what did they view as their main challenges and the main solutions that they were thinking about. And finally, we did this vulnerability analysis. So in here, we are combining different indicators. So it was an indicator-based vulnerability analysis, but we were looking at things like demographics that would kind of reveal the sensitivity factors that different populations had, and then we would pair those with climate exposure. So looking at flooding maps or heat maps. I really want to give a shout out to the city of Hermosillo, which did that, and then in addition they would consider infrastructural vulnerabilities. So in the flooding, they'll consider the different demographic groups. They would look at their flood potential, like biophysically, and then they would also add things about pipe diameter as well as pipe age, right? And so all those three combined, it gives you a really good understanding of social, ecological, and technological vulnerability. And so all of this data was compiled for all of the cities, and it also opens up the ability to do cross-city comparison. The workshop itself look like most workshops, post-it notes and people talking around a table. And so there was a series of activities that we did with them. Initially, usually in the morning, we did a lot of goal setting. So we tried to come up with like 2 or 3 really broad, large ideas, like blue sky thinking along whatever thematic they have chosen. And then we will kind of like take it one level down in terms of concreteness. And then we say, okay, well, this is a great goal to have. What are you going to do to get there? And so then folks will be identifying the strategies. And I think, in fact, like this is what they're doing in this workshop. Like that's where the post-it notes come in. After that, in the afternoon, we usually did this, what you see at the top of the screen here. That's a timeline. That's part of a timeline. Anyway, and there we were starting to ask to say, well, these strategies are well and good, but where we're going to place them, all right? And so people would sort of place those chronologically, and then like they would realize that, well, maybe in order, like to get this many community gardens, we need to like change zoning laws. And so like they would create a pathway, and that was important to start thinking in terms of pathways rather than just magically things will emerge. What you see in the middle is a map. We would offer blank maps of the city, and we would ask them to draw what, you want to put trees, but do you want to put the trees in, evenly distributed throughout the city, or do you want to have the trees in the richer, in the poorer, in the needier neighborhoods? And so they would draw, and this was really important because this is what the modelers kind of wanted, and that was extremely useful. And then what you see at the bottom, we had designers the entire time. We often brought students in to like just be designing the conversations, but this was also part of creating the narrative. At the very end of the workshop, we asked folks to just tell us a story of somebody who wakes up in their city, in their ideal city that they have created for the year 2080. And so, what does that city feel, smell like? Who do they see? What do they do? And so they create this narrative. I mean, all this to say is that the workshop itself produced very rich, very nuanced data. And then what we did is we took all of this into consideration. Just give me 1 second. So we took all this, and then we focus on 3 outputs that were common for all cities, and then each city could do whatever else they wanted. But some of the outputs were these design vignettes, which I'm sure that this is what you all are familiar with. So these are kind of like before and afters. And what we were trying to do is to capture somewhat pictorially what they wanted. So, this is from the Valdivia workshop in Chile. They wanted to have more activated spaces, more green infrastructure, more transit, carbon-free transit, etc. So this was done by our team. I wanted to just give a call out to the work that we did here in Phoenix. Instead of getting professional designers, we brought this to a studio of landscape architecture studio. And so we worked with the students. We gave them the outputs of our workshop, and then we challenged them. Their assignment was basically to then create those vignettes, and they did excellent work. And I think it was also a really neat model of bringing in some research, bringing in some pedagogy, and then having outputs that were really high quality, that all of the most of the outputs make their way into future workshops, and I continue to use their outputs. So back to the three synthetic outputs from the work that we did with each of the cities. We have the design vignettes. Then we did the land use models, and this is done by the team from the New School led by Timon McPherson. And this was just projections of different land of land use depending on what the vision require. And you can use this to then say, well, if you have transformed everything into a green oasis in Phoenix, well, temperature will cool down, water use will go up. And so like the idea was to then present it back to the people who created the visions to compare, contrast, and look at trade-offs. Because not everything can be mapped, we also did, I was leading the resilience, equity, sustainability qualitative assessment, which really, what it did, it like looked at the visions and looked at things like, well, we know that diversity usually increases resilience. Does this vision have mechanisms for increasing resilience, for increasing diversity? And so we would score it in a Likert scale. So those are academic outputs. In terms of like what, more practically, what did how did those scenarios influence the work of the cities? Well, most of the cities continued to work with us, right? Some cities have been very successful at getting more grants, and so we continue to work with Phoenix and New York and San Juan. We added Atlanta. I can say that from being involved in the climate action planning for Phoenix itself, I see that some of the work that some of the ideas, some of the stuff that we talked in the workshops have made their way, into the climate action plan. I know that they talk about these shade corridors. So that's definitely part of the conversation that we had, part of the climate action plan as well. I'm not trying to say that we're the only people that have talked about shade corridors ever, but they're there. Hermosillo as well has really adopted the Foresight methods, and they continue to do it without us. And in fact, they don't need us anymore, I don't think. But they have been a great team, and you can see it in a lot of the plans that they're using that methodology for, green infrastructure, etc. San Juan decided to create these work tables that were based on the scenarios. And I wanted to show you this map, but I'm afraid that I'm running a little bit tight on time. So instead, I'm going to invite you to go to that link. Is the work of one of our students, and it really is fantastic. And people in San Juan keep on using it and feeding it, and it's just a really great sort of like live repository of ideas and strategies for the future. But in the interest of time, I do want to move to this idea of, well, has there been transformation? This is a tough question because I'm not entirely certain that we would know if something transformative had happened. And what I mean is that ideas about what transformative change are sort of, everybody talks about them, but they're kind of hard to measure, to identify. I think that we can perhaps all agree that there's something about size and scope that is important in terms of saying that is transformative change. But it kind of gets tricky. And I think that the other component of transformative change is, does it have innovation? Will it change the system from the ground, from the roots, right? And I wanna, this will be the only slide that is a little bit more academic, but I wanted to point out to a framework that I think makes a little bit of sense to bring here, which is the David Absence and colleagues, and they put this out in 2017. So on the left side of the screen, it's Donella Meadows' Places to Intervene in the System. What Donella Meadows was saying is that, not all interventions will create similar amount of change, right? Like not all of them are equally useful leverage points. And so she identified 12 ways of intervening in a system, but that piece it's very abstract. So I'm very happy that David Absent and colleagues kind of summarized it a little bit for us. And so now I'm talking about the right column. And so what they're saying is like sometimes what we do when we intervene in a system, what we're doing is kind of like tweaking the numbers. We're changing the parameters. So this could be things like, well, we might change the amount of taxes. We might change the price of something. And these are not negligible changes. Like I'm not trying to downplay them, but these is still not challenging the system at all. So a more impactful intervention would be to changing the feedbacks. And what that means is not just changing, individual parts of the system, but changing how those parts are related to each other, changing the relations that maintain the system as is currently, so intervening in those feedback that has more impact. Even more impactful would be to start changing the structures that manage that system. So looking, not at like what are the parts of the system, not looking at just how those parts are related, but like who is managing that system. And then finally, the one that would be more impactful would be to change the intent of the system, what the system was created for. So changing the ethos of the system would be the most impactful. I know I'm talking a little bit abstract, so I just wanted to give you a more concrete example that comes from some of our scenarios. So there were conversations about, we want more vertical gardens. That's going to increase, cool down buildings and whatnot, and that's great. But that kind of like falls on, like, well, we're just adding a green wall to a building, and that's fantastic, and I'm sure it will have local cooling effects. But it's not really challenging anything about the way that we walk or conceive of cities. By contrast, like maybe a different conversation around the same topic of urban gardens was about, well, we're going to create a local food exchange economy. And all of a sudden you realize that, they're thinking completely different in terms of, what's the purpose of the gardens? What's the purpose of, gardening, of food, of buying food? Should we be buying food? So there's like a questioning that you can hear how those two are different places to intervene in this system. And so when I reflect on the scenario work that we have done, which I think it's been really great and has been unprecedented, I do see, in the data, there are some glimpses, like some glimpses of transformation. But I would also be the first person to recognize that it's not like sparks are flying here. That I think that a lot of times when we do this type of exercise, we tend to focus on things, on technological advancements. So we focus on things rather than processes or systems, right? As well, I think that it's really difficult to push people to think for 2080 or about 2080. I think that when you look at a lot of the strategies that have been identified, it kind of denotes a shorter time frame. I think that future tends to be more like 5 to 10 years rather than 50, 60 years into the future. And I think like maybe the one part that kind of bothers me the most is that I think that we are not thinking radically enough. That is, we tend to think of how to do things better, and that's clear in the scenarios, but we have a harder time thinking of how to do better things. And I want to offer a contrast from the work that I did, and this is a futures exercise that was run by a community organization here in Phoenix that's called Transqueer Pueblo. And this was done during a rally after the murder of George Floyd. So there were like teachings and there was, people talking. And so what they did, they had like this like big sheet of paper. And what they did is they invited people to come and find somebody in the crowd. And then they had prompts, they had cards that said, it's the future and we have abolished the police. So what would you do if somebody steals from you? What would you do if your neighbor is having a crisis? What would you do if you're walking alone at night and you feel unsafe? And for me, it was really interesting to see, and you can look. I mean, I know that it's a bit small, but like a lot of the answers denoted that they were done with the system, that they were thinking about a different system, that it wasn't about tweaking, it was about dismantling and creating a new. And so like this is like really radical ways of approaching the future. And so it's, oh, sorry, I got a bit of, can I continue? Sorry. Okay, thank you. If that was the 5-minute warning, I'm totally okay with that. I only have 5 minutes more of things to say. So and so here is the sort of provocation that I wanted to leave you with. In terms of fostering more transformative thinking. So one of the things that I want us to think about is that we need to challenge institutions. We need to challenge present day institutions if we want transformation to happen. And I'm talking about institutions broadly, institutions of knowledge, institutions of governance and law, economic institutions, etc. If we are not challenging that institutional setting, then whatever innovation, whatever transformation is going to just be absorbed by the system. Of course, this is a really hard thing to do for all of us who are mainstream, well-to-do people, because we are, part of those institutions. And so this brings me to my sort of second provocation, which is about how are we considering the margins, right? I think that we have much to learn from working with people who we do not often consider our allies, people who are really challenging the system because they live outside of the system or because the system does not represent them. So how do we engage that conversation with those folks? The other one, the third provocation is about engaging with the future. I work in a lot of participatory settings, and so I think that there's something really important about bringing future thinking to frontline communities. And I hear the criticism of saying, well, a lot of these communities have immediate needs. You can't really think about the future if you do not know what you're going to have for supper. And my comeback to that is that, well, our present day problems have been the result of somebody else's ideas about the future some time back. Somebody made decisions, somebody had visions, somebody had desires, and we're living those now. So I think that if we don't think of our own future, somebody else will. And I remember when we were working in San Juan and Maria happened, and San Juan hadn't had or Puerto Rico hadn't had a chance to count the dead. And there was already talk about privatizing the energy system. So clearly, disaster capitalists think about the future, and those are futures that will be imposed on us unless we do something about it. And then the last provocation, or maybe this is really an invitation, is about practicing radical hope. I think this is not a call to be naive about our possibilities. It's really about being very aware, but rising to that challenge. I think that if you're an optimist, and this comes from Rebecca Solnit, she says it better than me, but if you're an optimist, you basically think everything is going to be good and you're not going to do nothing about it. If you're a pessimist, you're going to think that everything is terrible and you'll do nothing about it. But if you have hope, you'll be moved to do something about that. And I think that that's what we need for urban transformations. And I do think that is, I think it's our duty. I think that it would be irresponsible if we were to become jaded and stop dreaming. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Marta. Really fantastic exploration and lots of I think key aspects of it that are going to provoke some thinking amongst us, and sort of in the spirit of what we always hope to achieve at Pragma Council events is this provides an excellent foundation for a deeper dive into discussion and trying to make a connection to our local context as well. As was communicated in the materials for this event, everyone's aware that we're now going to go once again into breakout room land, but this time it's going to be a facilitated discussion, and we have 6 volunteers from the Pragma community that have instructions on sort of a guided exploration, and we felt that in considering the keynote address that Marta provided around transformations and thinking about urban transformations, certainly one of the transformations that is, I guess, front and center for many of us is around the climate emergency. And in that spirit, we've posed a couple of questions for our participants today to dig into in the breakout rooms. So I'm going to drop the questions first into the chat so you can see where we're going. And again, this is just an example of a vehicle thinking about transformations. And again, the work that we do, and they came in a color that hopefully, I always love technology. It is my friend. So hopefully you can read those okay. So it's about, first of all, what is the role of the planner in addressing the climate emergency, speaking of transformations. And then the second element is, are you prepared as a planner to address the climate emergency? So without further ado, we're going to spend approximately 20 minutes exploring these questions. And then we're going to come back together as a larger group, and I'm going to ask the 6 facilitators to give us a report back on the discussions that were had in each of the rooms. Again, part of the intent is to provide some, not only sort of deeper thinking around this, but also to give us an opportunity to think about some of the gaps that might exist in these theme areas, and also for future Pragma events to perhaps focus on this theme of transformations, futures, and in this case, as it relates to the climate emergency. So hopefully this works. Let's all cross our fingers. I feel like William Shatner. So I'm going to open up the breakout rooms, and you should have a facilitator in each one of the rooms. So.
Sean, how are you?
Oh, great, Larry. Hey.
Good to see you.
Great. How's school going, Larry?
Well,
So for some reason, gentlemen, the 3 of you, and I see that Angie's here as well. I'm assuming Eric, Ken, and Tom, you can hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I have assigned you to breakout rooms, but it's like the system isn't sending you there, and I'm not sure if it's the way that you've connected in or what.
So I think
But
I might be able to go to the breakout room. I see a room 1 button, so perhaps I can try to go there.
Yeah, because you're supposed to be in room 1, Eric. So if you want to try that. All right.
I just came on the link they sent us, so.
Yeah, no, you're fine. But Ken, you should be in room 3. So do you see something that looks like a breakout room button? It's kind of like a small square, or because
Nothing.
you see nothing because it says that you're there.
I
Oh,
don't-
hang on.
It
I
just
gotta-
says that Eric Davis is on hold. And
So the system might be sending you a message saying, please join room 3. So I just tried calling you. And Tom, you were supposed to be in room 2.
I was in a room briefly and I got booted out and I don't see any sign that I can click on.
Yeah. So you're both guests, but there's something about it that for some reason is not let. I just tried inviting you again, Tom. I sent a message that said it's calling you anyway.
Okay, calling me in.
Well,
Where?
no. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I've got it here, accept.
So if you accept that, maybe there you go. So Ken, if I do the same thing with you,
I'll watch.
just watch for it. So I'm going to ask to join. So there should be something might appear in the screen that says ask to join, and it's breakout room 3 that you're.
Is it in the chat or?
No, it might be up at the top, like on the banners, or if you look at something about the meeting, like if you hit the 3 dots on the top. Of course, I'm not sure what screen exactly that you're looking at. So the chat's open, or you can look at participants. Actually, why don't I try doing participants? Hang on. Ken. Make an attendee. So I've made you an attendee. So I'm going to try asking you again.
Okay. I have something at the top that says recording and transcription have started, and then I have a dismiss button beside that.
Yeah, you can dismiss that. Sorry, that's just the recording
Okay.
notification.
But nothing.